안녕하세요. EMS 아카데미에서 이번 SAT 수업에 맡은 김유진입니다. I will be offering a sample lesson on a passage in the reading section of the SAT. I will walk you through the actual passage and we will answer the first 10 questions together. So let's get started. The first thing that you notice about any reading passage is the fact that there is a little excerpt at the beginning of each passage, and they offer clues as to what you need to know. From here we can gather that it is from 1857, and to that end, just noting the time era is very important. It tells you what type of language you'll be running into, what type of diction, and the type of things that are occurring within the story. Okay, so let's get started. No man likes to acknowledge that he has made a mistake in the choice of his profession, and every man worthy of the name will roll long against wind and tide before he allows himself to cry out, "I am baffled," and submits to be floated passively back to land. Okay, so in this very first sentence, it's also very important to note is that we get a sense of the tone. Here we have what seems like a personal narrative, and he offers this metaphor of rowing against the wind. Okay, typically in these type of passages, you will see that there is an introduction to the subject matter that we'll be dealing with for the rest of the passage. And to that end, we know that he has a problem where he's rowing against the wind. And that's not fun to do, nor is it easy. And at some point, he's exasperated. He says, "I'm baffled." And this is also important because it tells us what type of engagement strategy he has with the problem itself. So let's see what kind of problems that he has. From the first week of my residence in X, I felt my occupation irksome. Irksome means he did not like it. The thing itself, the work of copying and translating business letters, was a dry and tedious task enough, but had that been all, I should long have been born with the nuisance. I am not of an impatient nature and influenced by the double desire of getting my living and justifying to myself and others the resolution I had taken to become a tradesman. I should have endured in silence the rust and cramp of my best faculties. We're not even finished with the sentence yet, but let's break that down a little bit. Okay, so from his first week of residence in X, okay, so let's say that he lives in this place called X, and he doesn't like his job. He finds his occupation irksome. The thing itself, the thing that he actually does, is the work of copying and translating business letters. It's dry and tedious. If you've ever seen the movie Office Space, it must seem something like that. He probably deals with TPS reports all day. And had that been all, he would have been just fine with the work itself. A lot of people don't like their jobs, but they can deal with it so long as there aren't other variables at play. Because he's also patient. He's not of an impatient nature and influenced by the double desire of getting his living and justifying to himself that he had become a tradesman. He's happy not having to kill two birds with one stone and enjoy his work and make money off of it too. As we go down here, we also notice after that semicolon, or prior to the semicolon rather, the rust and cramp of my best faculties. I love that. It is very, very vibrant of a way to articulate how he feels. Just like a machine rusts when it's not used, his best faculties are not being used at his job, so he definitely feels a rust and a cramp about it, okay? I should have whispered, even inwardly, that I longed for liberty. I should have pent in every sigh by which my heart might have ventured to intimate its distress under the closeness, smoke, monotony, and joyless tumult of Big Ben Close. Okay, so we finally figure out where he works. He works at Big Ben Close. The name itself doesn't really seem to matter too much, but what's important is that he's holding back and trying not to allow his inner creativity, his inner passions venture out and intimate its distress. Okay? Because he's definitely distressed, but it's almost as if he's self-flagellating. He wants to show that he has tried every effort and knows that he needs to deal with this in a way that isn't obtrusive on his well-being or his livelihood. And he continues on discussing this. He says, I should have set up the image of duty, the fetish of perseverance. These are also very, very delicious ways to articulate this. The image of duty and the fetish of perseverance. Perseverance can be considered a fetish because you're doing something to the point of incessant habit because you have to in the image of duty. Things that a lot of people, again, have to deal with in their daily lives. And he also lives at Mrs. King's lodgings in a small bedroom. And they too should have been my household gods. The things that he lives by. Important to note. Okay? So we move on. My darling, my cherished in secret imagination, the tender and the mighty should never, either by softness or strength, have severed me. What is he saying here? He's saying that imagination, one thing that he definitely shows, he cherishes it in secret, should not be allowed to come out, should not have severed him or disconnected him from this scenario. But this was not all. The antipathy which had sprung up between myself and my employer, okay, all of a sudden we find out the reason why, okay? Why is he showing all of this distress? He suddenly uses a strong word, antipathy, okay? Deep-seated resentment towards somebody here. And it's somebody above him, of course, okay? Striking deeper root and spreading denser shade daily. Excluding me from every glimpse of the sunshine of life. I began to feel like a plant growing in humid darkness out of the slimy walls of a well. Again, beautiful, beautiful imagery and literally throwing shade. What we see here is that he's in the shadow of his employer, and his employer is so insipid, such a difficult aspect of his life, that he's growing in darkness, as in perhaps it's rage, perhaps it's that antipathy. Something is growing, as if a mold or moss would be in the darkness, in the slimy walls of a well. Okay, so it's not just your average hate for your employer, it's definitely something more. And here we see again, antipathy. Antipathy is the only word which can express the feeling Edward Crimsworth had for me. Finally, the object of hate gets a name. It's Edward Crimsworth. A feeling, in a great measure, involuntary, and which was liable to be excited by the most trifling movement, look, or word of mine. My southern accent annoyed him. The degree of education evinced in my language irritated him. My punctuality, industry, and accuracy fixed his dislike and gave it the high flavor and poignant relish of envy. Okay, so before we go any further, let's just talk about this, all right? It seems that he's broken down to a science why Edward Crimsworth has a problem with him. Not only is it his voice, the education that he has, his punctuality. These are all positive things, so why does he have a problem with it? It sounds like he's simply a hater, and to that end, he has very quite much fixed his dislike, and he feared, importantly, okay, beyond the descriptions of everything that he's trying to show you as a problem, he feared that I too should one day make a successful tradesman. All right, and that's the hallmark aspect of the hater, is that this person, Edward Crimsworth, feels that the only way for him to ascend is to push down on others. Quite the bully. Had I been anything inferior to him, he would not have hated me so thoroughly. But I knew all that he knew, and what was worse, he suspected that I kept the padlock of silence on mental wealth in which he was no sharer. Not only is he better than him, he knows that this person, okay, Edward Crimsworth knows that the narrator here is actually smarter than he lets on. So even if he is calculating, even if he acts like he doesn't know any better, Edward Crimsworth would, at a moment's notice, realize what he's doing and hate him even more. So it's not like he can pretend that he's stupid. He's already shared that he isn't. If he could have once placed me in a ridiculous or mortifying position, he would have forgiven me much. But I was guarded by 3 faculties: caution, tact, and observation. Okay, this is a very vigilant guy, and because of that, we have Edward Crimsworth prowling and prying, as was Edward's malignity, and it could never baffle the lynx eyes of these, my natural sentinels. So he describes himself as quite observant, quite vigilant, and just like a sentinel. Okay, he's keeping guard. He knows Edward Crimsworth's intent, and he's trying to be quite careful about not unfurling his anger at him, because he's waiting to attack. Day by day, his malice watched my tact, hoping it would sleep, and prepared to steal snake-like on its slumber. But tact, if it be genuine, never sleeps. Okay? Okay, on to the next page. I had received my first quarter's wages and was returning to my lodgings. He finally got his first paycheck. Possessed heart and soul with the pleasant feeling that the master who had paid me grudged every penny of that hard-earned pittance. I had long ceased to regard Mr. Crimsworth as my brother. He was a hard, grinding master. He wished to be an inexorable tyrant. That was all. Okay, this is going to be important later, and we will definitely notate that here. I had long since ceased to regard Mr. Crimsworth as my brother. That means at some point, maybe he thought that Mr. Crimsworth might be a good guy, but definitely not the case anymore. And in fact, he actually really enjoys the fact that Edward Crimsworth is very, very grudgingly paying for his work, and he really doesn't like the fact that that he has to. And it's just like if you relish winning over somebody that you've had to deal with. This is sort of the same thing here. He's quite happy with Mr. Crimsworth's discontent. Thoughts, not varied but strong, occupied my mind. 2 voices spoke within me. Again and again they uttered the same monotonous phrases. One said, "William, your life is intolerable." The other, "What can you do to alter it?" So he has 2 minds about it. I walked fast, for it was a cold, frosty night in January. As I approached my lodgings, I turned from a general view of my affairs to the particular speculation as to whether my fire would be out. Looking towards the window of my sitting room, I saw no cheering red gleam. Okay, so again we get into sort of this imagery. He just finished a really hard day at work, he finally got paid, and he's excited to go home, and all of a sudden he realizes that his lodgings aren't very welcoming at all. Remember, he has the duty of, the image of duty and the fetish of perseverance to look forward to, and that's not much to enjoy. Okay, so hopefully you got the gist of the passage itself. And without understanding the tone or the character of what this suggests, this passage is actually quite hard. So let's keep that in mind. The first question, which choice best summarizes the passage? Okay, so we're going to walk through these answers very quickly. A character describes his dislike for his new job and considers the reasons why. And that definitely sounds like the answer here, but let's just take a look at the other ones to make sure that they don't come off as seemingly correct. 2 characters employed in the same office become increasingly competitive. Okay, competitive means that they have the same either position or they have some aspect of competitiveness, but that's not possible here. We're talking about an employer and employee. There's a differential in power, and therefore it cannot be B. Okay? A young man regrets privately a choice that he defends publicly. That's actually not the case. We've never heard the narrator suggest that despite the fact that he does somewhat show regret toward the choice that he may have had in his mind, he definitely does not defend that publicly, so it cannot be C. Number D, a new employee experiences optimism, then frustration, and finally despair. That's definitely not the case. It sounds to me that he didn't enjoy this experience at all from the get-go. And if he did, then we would know because we don't need to infer that, okay? He should have said, or it should have been stated outright. So it's definitely A, okay? Okay, so let's start on number 2, the main purpose of the opening sentence of the passage. So let's take a look at the opening sentence here. No man likes to acknowledge that he has made a mistake in the choice of his profession. And every man worthy of the name will roll long against wind and tide before he allows himself to cry out, I am baffled. Okay? Again, like we explained at the beginning of this section, he doesn't like his job. And he is pushing against all of his instincts, all the things that he wants to do, which is to stop, but he continues to do so anyway. So let's keep that in mind as we move back to the question and take a look. Okay, so A, establish the narrator's perspective on a controversy. That certainly does not happen here, so it cannot be A. B, provide context useful in understanding the narrator's emotional state. Emotional state is what's important here, and that's definitely what's going on. He puts his arms up and cries, I am baffled. So it's definitely B here, okay? Just in case, let's take a look at C and D, and let me tell you why it doesn't work. C says, offer a symbolic representation of Crimsworth's plight. While it's not actually symbolic, okay, it's metaphorical definitely, okay, but Edward Crimsworth's plight, it's not even Edward Crimsworth. That's the other guy, right? So that's definitely not the case here. D, contrast the narrator's good intentions with his malicious conduct. Definitely not a contrast there because he doesn't really have any malicious conduct. He just has malicious feelings maybe against Edward Crimsworth, but he most certainly doesn't express that in any way. He's not a bad guy, he just doesn't like his boss, okay? Okay, so number 3, during the course of the first paragraph, the narrator's focus shifts from what to what, okay? So if you go back to the passage and take a look, you'll definitely notice that, that there is a shift that occurs after the first paragraph. It shifts from a general discussion of how people deal with choosing an occupation they later regret. Okay, that's in lines 1 through 6. To the narrator's description of his own dissatisfaction with his occupation. So it's most certainly C here. Okay, because he's generalizing the idea of his own dissatisfaction. And then he transitions into exactly why, which is where Edward Crimsworth comes in. That's the point at which he's allowed, or you can definitely see that that his situation goes from bad to worse, and he definitely expresses why. Because at first it kind of seems like he just doesn't like his job like everybody else, but that's not really the case. It's definitely because he's being incited by his boss in a way that is particularly bad. Okay, look at number 4. The references to shade and darkness at the end of the first paragraph mainly have which effect? Remember, this is the part where there is that beautiful imagery of him growing in the darkness of a well, right? And here, what we can see is that they definitely, it's an image that shows that he's almost destitute of hope. That it's definitely something that's growing in him, and he's afraid of its consequences on him as a person. So it's definitely A here. They evoke this narrator's sense of dismay. Dismay is a feeling that you feel when you feel like there's nothing else that you can do, and that's important to note here. Okay, number 5. The passage indicates that Edward Crimsworth's behavior was mainly caused by what? Take a look here, and Was it impatience with the narrator's high spirits? Definitely not. Okay? Maybe when he was giving him money, but you can't say that the narrator had high spirits at all. It can't be scorn of the narrator's humble background because his background was better than his. And indignation at the narrator's rash actions. Actually, that's quite the opposite of what the narrator does. The narrator is actually very methodical and careful. So we get D right here, the jealousy of the narrator's apparent superiority. Definitely apparent, and he knows it's to the point where even if the narrator acts like he's stupid, it just wouldn't work for him. Okay? Alright, so number 6. The passage indicates that when the narrator began working for Edward Crimsworth, he viewed Crimsworth as a what? And so if you go back to the passage where I pointed out earlier in the video, he actually thought of him as a sympathetic ally. More than almost any other question in this passage, this one students typically get wrong because it's really hard to find. But if you go and take a look, there is a part of the passage that suggests that he no longer felt or saw Edward Crimsworth as a brother. And that's the big clue there that tells you he's definitely thought of him as a sympathetic ally, no longer does. Number 7. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Go ahead and take a look. If you don't know the answer to the previous question, there is a strategy where you can actually look at the lines that come after, especially when you can see that they're paired questions like this. It's a way for you to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And so you can go to this and take a look at the lines and see if it actually matches with the question. But it's a very time-consuming strategy. So the idea is for you to confirm, but if you can't, you can always go to the follow-up question like this one and figure out where it pinpoints the answer to the previous question. But for this one, the choice is D, right here in lines 61 to 62, because the narrator states that he once regarded Crimsworth as a brother, as I said before. At the end of the second paragraph, the comparisons of abstract qualities to a lynx and a snake mainly had the effect of what? And the answer is D, illustrating the nature of an adversarial relationship. A lynx and a snake are most certainly enemies, and they're both have their own strategies in terms of engagement. A lynx has very, very good nocturnal vision, and a snake is very, very silent. And so there is that sort of contrast, and they definitely serve as these metaphorical examples to show that Edward Crimsworth and the narrator are kind of just waiting in a war of attrition, waiting to see which one slips up and which one will be able to strike. Okay, number 9. The passage indicates that after a long day of work, the narrator sometimes found his living quarters to be what? Absolutely splendid, right? Not really. It was quite dreary, actually. All these other answers here, maybe there's just one here, if you can see it, that might be a reasonable answer, but it's not exactly. If it was intolerable, what is something that's intolerable? That means he cannot tolerate it, so it can definitely not be D, because he goes back, whether it is a lively place to be or not, because he has to. Again, you got to remember this image of duty and fetish of perseverance. It's an image that carries all the way through this entire passage. Most certainly not predictable, and yes, it is definitely dreary. Treacherous means that it's dangerous. It might be dangerous in the long run, but most certainly not something that we can make an inference about here. And that takes us to our last question here. Again, one of the paired questions that you often see. And in this one, the evidence that's provided here is, one second, if you pull it back up, in lines 68 to 74, okay, the narrator states that he did not see the cheering glow of a fire in his sitting room fireplace, and it definitely shows you that it is bleak. On top of the fact that he lives sort of a Spartan life, Even the objects that he has inside his room, his image is just something kind of made up. So he definitely goes back only for the rest and not because it's a luxurious resort. Okay, so definitely D is the answer. And again, if you don't know the answer to these kind of questions, question number 9, for example, go to the follow-up question and see if you can pinpoint it out. But you have to always be wary of time. So that is another strategy to be discussed at a later date. Okay, and so that actually concludes this sample lesson on just one of the most difficult passages in the practice SATs. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm Eugene Kim at EMS Academy. Thank you so very much.